Welcome to Game Plan for Retirement with Chris McIntire. McIntire Retirement Services, Northwest Ohio's retirement planning resource.
And we are here once again with Chris McIntire, your resource for a common sense approach to planning with your money, for your financial and retirement future. He is president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services, helping you put together your game plan for retirement. Chris, today going over one of the most important elements of retirement success and confidence, and that is having a specific plan to cover your expenses and address them and make sure that you've got the income to last throughout retirement. Now, you've got this great report, the 3 largest expenses in retirement and how to plan to control them. If we are going to talk expenses, let's talk the big ones, Chris.
Well, sure. Yeah. Inflation is one of them. It is an expense. It's almost like a hidden tax or a stealth tax. And Ben Bernanke, when he was the president of the Federal Reserve, actually testified in Congress that inflation is the same thing as a stealth tax. And the irony is, Bernanke was our president of the Federal Reserve when we did not have a lot of inflation like we're looking at right now. So, it's certainly something that is at the forefront here in 2022 for everybody, and even as we're starting to wind down and looking into 2023, inflation is going to be the buzzword. And that ties into taxes as well, because that's taking away dollars out of our pockets. So taxes are going to be important as well, Peter.
Well, when it first arrived or started to surge, they said that it was transitory or temporary. Chris, once prices inflate and go up, I don't really see them ever going back down. The inflation rate year over year, maybe, but the prices themselves that have already risen, I don't see a lot of adjustment back to quote unquote normal levels.
And that's going to be the challenge for us as consumers. To put enough, it all is depending on the supply and demand. I read an article here just recently that talked about lumber prices have come back to kind of that pre-COVID level anyway, as supply chains start to normalize. But, as inflation runs up, those prices are not going to probably go back down below where they had previously been. That would be deflation. And, we're probably going to be looking at inflation at an accelerated rate for, at least the next 12 to 24 months to, try not to pin me down to an exact prediction here, but, it got to, let's call it 8 to 10%. It's not going to go back to 2 overnight. However, history does tell us that the inflation environment is like an inverted V. So it can come down as fast as it went up. And I think our Federal Reserve is trying to stick to that pattern by raising rates so rapidly. And, we've got a global situation going on. This is not the oil embargo of the 1970s when the Arab nations were punishing the U.S. for arming Israel. That's what started the oil embargo. This is a supply chain issue, a global pandemic hit. We got massive amounts of stimulus that came in, which is just simply cash. And if the government made a mistake on one side, they put too much cash in the system. But, if you're a politician and you want to get elected, you're going to do things that are favorable to get you elected. We're not pointing fingers at anybody. That's the reality, right?
Stimulus money was very popular on both sides of the aisle and with the American public, but 20% of all of the dollars currently in circulation have been created since the onset of the pandemic. And you can go to the Federal Reserve Economic Data, Fred charts and statistics to check that out. But Chris, when you pump that much new money into the economy, the dollars that were in existence prior to that time get watered down. Their value decreases.
Yeah, they certainly do. And as today's retirees are struggling to, let's say make ends meet with these rising prices, having that income plan in place is certainly paramount for them, covering those basic expenses. try to take pressure off of your investment portfolio. For those that are, living off of returns in the stock market or dividends and bond interest, 2022 has been an awfully tough year for, just investors. People that are still working are looking at 401k statements saying, oh my God, this hurts. Imagine being, a retiree here, just freshly retired, and looking at that saying, man, I had 20% more money a year and a half ago than I do now. And, that's a hit. And, we've often talked about withdrawal rate risk or sequence of returns risk. And this is one of those years where, the sequence of returns is, can have certainly a large impact on today's retirees.
Once again, we are talking with Chris McIntire, president and founder of McIntire Retirement Services. If you have questions, you have concerns, if you would like a complimentary plan review, a complimentary analysis, a retirement planning strategy session to put together your game plan for retirement, pick up the phone and give a call, 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194, 800-868-1194. Chris, adding up the cost, retirement can be very expensive. I think one of the most concerning things, at least in a recent conversation I had with a retiree, was that even if the market's not going down, I'm spending, so I'm losing money. And there is a fear that when the two happen simultaneously, it increases the potential likelihood of running out of money in retirement.
Yeah. And, that's somebody's biggest fear typically in the non-pension environment we live in is running out of money, and having a plan in place with instruments that can guarantee that you don't run out of income, is certainly something you would want to have as, either your plan A or your plan B. Some folks have done very well, saved an incredible amount of money, and they're not necessarily concerned about running out of money, but they are concerned about having a solid income plan in place. So that certainly bodes well for, let's call it the baby boom generation, which is who we're dealing with here today, in a generation that does like to be active and spend dollars. This isn't the sit on the front porch in a rocking chair mentality that, may have been of the previous generation. And I don't think that's a fair assessment anyway, but these are today's baby boomers are jumping on airplanes, flying overseas, spending money that they've spent a career trying to earn and save so that they could do some of the things they've always had goals and aspirations for.
But Chris, without a specific written game plan for retirement, a plan for retirement income in writing, the only way to combat the potential possibility of expenses exceeding our income and assets is putting that plan together, and we run the risk of running out. So we've got to identify some of our largest expenses and have that plan specifically formulated to address them. You've got a great resource that you've put together, kind of a 2-page report, the 3 biggest expenses in retirement and how to plan to control them. And ladies and gentlemen, if you would like this resource to go over on your own time, if you'd like to see how to plan, how to structure the plan and the assets specifically to address these expenses, if you'd like to talk it over with a family member, spouse, loved one, maybe a coworker who's been talking about retirement around the water cooler, pick up the phone and give McIntire Retirement Services a call, 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194. But Chris, number one on the list, our largest known expense in retirement, taxes. And a lot of times while we are during our working career, we don't really talk about the tax implications of the savings and the investments that we are accumulating.
Yeah, you're exactly right. People have been trying to defer those taxes and putting money into IRAs and 401ks. And the people that are listening to the show today, their largest asset from an investment standpoint is most likely a tax deferred retirement account, traditional IRA, 401k, 403b, 457 plan. If we've listed a number of the different taxes you're going to have as you go through retirement and even everyday life, but you're going to have federal income taxes, state income taxes. If you live in the state of Ohio, when you pull money out of those traditional accounts, okay, we have sales taxes when we buy things. We have property taxes if you own your own property. You have gift taxes, vehicle taxes, If your telephone bill has a number of taxes to it, if you buy an airplane ticket, if you rent a car in Florida, for crying out loud, stay in a hotel down there, look at all of the taxes that come out of there. If you were to look at your itemized bill, it is alarming. And we'll get into the whole healthcare side of things as a major expense, but taxes are ongoing because if you're healthy, you're out there spending money, and typically you're going to, give your fair share to, the Internal Revenue Service. And at 72, you've got to take those required minimum distributions, which is basically what we're doing right now for all of our clients. This is kind of that required minimum distribution season. In 2022 is a good year to consider Roth IRA conversions. I've got my IRA assets are down in value. Should I shift some of them over into a Roth IRA, pay taxes at a lower level, and hopefully they recover? And if you're watching on the podcast, I'm talking with my hands here, so maybe the visual helps you understand that.
It may feel a little bit like pouring salt in the wound, though, at the moment, Chris, paying taxes while the account is down in value, but long-term gain from short-term pain.
Yeah, certainly. And it depends on the individual situation, no question about it. So you want to make sure you've done your homework here before you just, at the drop of a hat, convert $100,000, for example. We have some tax brackets that we think are pretty favorable for folks to consider Roth conversions. And a lot of times a Roth conversion is done for folks who want to pass money on to, kids or grandkids, and maybe, the children are very high income earners. For example, your daughter is a doctor, she married a doctor. You probably wouldn't want to pass them on IRA type assets where they'd have to pay income tax when they make withdrawals, and they might be in the 37% income tax bracket. If you pass them on a Roth IRA, that's income tax free.
U.S. government, the IRS, collected over $5.3 trillion in taxes last year. The Center for Retirement Research at Boston College estimated that the average American will pay over $480,000 in taxes over the course of their lifetime. So, Chris, obviously a big line item expenditure for us is taxes. Where possible, we want to plan proactively to control and minimize that tax liability, especially since a lot of that tax bill is probably realized in retirement.
Yes, it certainly can be, Peter. It's just amazing. Being self-employed, we write quarterly checks to the Internal Revenue Service. And if every American had to do that, they would certainly demand more from their government. But since it just comes out of your paycheck, it's money you don't miss. And, a lot of people don't necessarily account for the dollar amounts in taxes that they're paying. And take Social Security, for example. They withheld money from your paycheck to pay it to you later on in retirement. And initially it was designed to not be taxed. Okay? And now it can be taxed, and they can tax up to 85% of your Social Security benefit, in whatever income tax bracket that money falls. So it could be the 22% bracket. So you're getting $20,000 a year from Social Security and paying 22% income tax on that. Now you're getting, basically $16,000, not $20,000.
Once again, we are speaking with Chris McIntire. And if you would like to put together your game plan for retirement, the proprietary written retirement income plan that you can find there at McIntire Retirement Services, pick up the phone and give a call. Chris does offer the opportunity for you to put that together with the help of an experienced, qualified professional, no cost, no obligation. We have seen similar plans go upwards of $1,000 to several thousands of dollars. But just for being a radio show listener or podcast viewer, you can get your hands on that plan, get it put together and structured for your unique individual situation, along with the help of Chris McIntire, your resource here on the program. All you need to do to get started, pick up the phone and give a call, 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194. For the most part, Chris, preparing taxes, paying taxes is kind of historical. It is looking back at last year. What you are proposing is really taking a different look and perspective at that and being much more proactive, looking forward at controlling that tax liability into the future, especially in the face of potential tax increases in the future. May be very valuable to be a little bit more proactive.
Yeah. And, Peter, we don't know who's going to be in power making the choices and the decisions here. And, this year in 2020, they've enacted some tax increases. What they're going to say is on corporations. So that's a tax increase. Where do you think that money will get passed on to? The Trump tax cuts from 2016 will expire in 2026. So income tax rates will go back to where they were previously. So the 12% bracket goes to 15%. The 22% bracket goes to 25%. So those are some things that are already set in stone to happen. Nobody knows what the legislation is going to do. And it depends probably on, who's running the House Budget Committee and so on and so forth. We'll avoid a political discussion here today, but we would call that legislative risk, right? They could, in fact, change the required minimum distribution amounts if they wanted to. That would also affect taxation. Just like they did with the way IRAs are distributed when the owner passes away and wants to give money to kids or grandkids, non-spouse beneficiaries, to be more specific. A lot of times that money's got to be distributed within 10 years instead of over their lifetimes.
Again, we've got to understand all the implications as well as the strategies and opportunities that are available to control that tax liability. What is our largest known expense in retirement? And we are talking with Chris McIntire today about this report that he's got available, the resource, The 3 Biggest Retirement Expenses and How to Plan to Control Them. If you'd like to get your hands on this and go over it and review it on your own time, pick up the phone, give a call. 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194. If you would like to formulate your game plan for retirement, a specific written retirement income plan that addresses these factors, your opportunity to do that, no cost, no obligation. Just give a call to McIntire Retirement Services. Set up a conversation, a convenient time for a complimentary review and strategy session with Chris McIntire. 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194. From our largest known expense, taxes, Chris, we move to number 2 on the list, our largest potential expense. Now, I think this is going to be a known expense to some extent anyway, but just how big this line item is in our retirement budget, just how much of an expenditure this constitutes is the potential here. And the potential is that it could get pretty scary pretty quick. Healthcare expenses.
Peter, I'll tell you, my wife and I spend over $30,000 a year on healthcare expenses while we're working right now because we have to pay for our own health insurance. A lot of retirees today think that I'm going to turn 65, I'll get Medicare, my health insurance is going to go down or it's basically free. Well, they take $173 a month out of your Social Security benefit for Part B of Medicare, which covers 80% of your basic doctor visits, so then you go out and spend maybe another $200 a month on that supplemental piece that you need. Then you need a prescription drug piece and you've got some copays that go in there as well. So your health insurance in retirement might cost you $600 a month. And if you're a married couple, it could be $1,200 a month, which is $14,400 a year. So, a lot of people don't necessarily extrapolate it out to that degree, and we're not even talking about some time spent in a nursing home, Peter, which could be, $8,000 to $10,000 a month, so $100,000 a year, even in home care. If you want somebody to come in and help you, cook meals and whatnot, we have somebody who helps my father-in-law out. We have a dear friend in a nursing home. I've got 2 parents that's, so far so good with them, but eventually they may need some help on a daily basis or, several times a week. And, that's out-of-pocket expenses if you don't have some insurance to cover some of those expenses. Medicare does not cover everything, folks.
Health View Services estimated that the average healthy 65-year-old couple entering retirement can expect to spend over $360,000 on Medicare premiums alone over the course of retirement. Now, we know that a lot of additional income for that same couple would come in from Social Security, but that is a substantial figure, Chris, and something that we absolutely have to plan and prepare for. If you care, careful planners are going to plan for care expenses.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I'm 57 years old and I have, care in place if something happened and I had to go into a nursing facility, right? I wanted to get it while I was young, while it was cheap, and so on and so forth. And I'll be done paying for it by the time I get to where I'm going to need it. So many different ways to structure, some of these other types of healthcare potential expenses that will come up. There are others that aren't potential, that are just part of normal living. We have to have some catastrophic insurance in case you go to the hospital, like cancer comes into play, diabetes treatment. I mean, there are several issues that, today's Americans deal with, especially the diabetes epidemic we have. Let's face it, we have a terrible diet in the United States.
Chris, let's talk about some of those additional costs, the potential for nursing care, assistance, long-term care. What are the options to address those? I know that traditional long-term care insurance does not seem to be as prevalent, nor was it really a method of addressing this issue that seemed to be attractive to a lot of individuals when it was more prevalent.
Yeah. And a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth from the traditional long-term care insurance and the fact that premiums increased, certain coverages might have been denied, so the state departments of insurance have, written some guidelines to, even that piece of it out. So I'll tell you what I have. I have a life insurance policy that has a death benefit. And let's just say it's got $300,000 to use a round number, of a death benefit, that if I went into the nursing home, I can use 2% of that death benefit on a monthly basis. So it's got like a long-term care rider to it. Some insurance companies will call them a chronic illness rider, which means it might not be as specific to, you have to be in the nursing home. We're going to reimburse you for expenses you are paying. Some of them are indemnity type riders that says you can pay anybody you want to. You can trigger the benefits even if you aren't getting the care. And you can't do 2 of the 6 activities of daily living, or you have a cognitive impairment. So I know that's pretty technical coming over the airways in a short amount of time, but nowadays there's 2 ways that most long-term care policies or insurance protection are written. And that's, attaching it to a life insurance policy, because that's not use it or lose it. If you pass away, somebody's going to get the income tax-free death benefit. And then you could also then, if you can say, look, I got some money sitting in a bank in a CD. I don't want a life insurance policy. Then a lot of times you can do a tax deferred annuity that'll have a long-term care piece to that says, hey, if you go in, here's how much we'll pay for a month. And, for how long we'll pay that for you, right? A number of things you could select, how much is it going to pay a month and how long will it pay? And then that way, if, at some point in time, you say, you know what, everything's going well here, I'm going to go do something different with my money. And some of these give you a little more freedom to do with that. So they're not the use it or lose it type policies that the traditional long-term care insurance was kind of known for, and the way it was built, to be honest, back in the day.
Well, there are ways to approach this. Bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, one of your largest potential expenses in retirement, and in order to make retirement as comfortable, stable, and confident as possible, you've got to have a carefully executed plan, a game plan for retirement in writing that addresses these expenses. If you would like to put that game plan for retirement together, the proprietary written retirement income plan that Chris McIntire and McIntire Retirement Services put together for their clients, pick up the phone and give a call, 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194, 800-868-1194. A little bit of full circle and a little bit of a spoiler alert, Chris, talking about our next silent thief, which is the third on your list of these three biggest expenses in retirement. Healthcare expenses are one of those things that are inflating in price quicker than almost anything else, although everything else is seeming to catch up with that rate of inflation this year.
Yeah, certainly appears to be that, Peter, after a very long period of time where, the traditional inflation, the way the government measures it, had been very low. In the United States, for whatever reason, they don't use food or fuel, in the cost of inflation. And I think all of us would realize that, that's where a lot of us realize a lot of inflation.
Indeed.
Because we're traveling, we're eating and whatnot. We've had a major cost of living increase here again for, going into 2023. There's a couple pretty good sized ones back to back here between 2022, what you got and what you're going to get in 2023 to help people in retirement, deal with the rising costs. And if you think of it this way, if inflation stays at 6%, okay, if you take the number of 72, divide that by 6, in 12 years, you'll need twice as much money to buy the same goods and services you're buying today. So, those cost of living adjustments, you're certainly going to need. I just had a meeting with a client who retired from the Whirlpool Corporation here not too long ago, and they had a traditional pension plan years ago. I believe it was 1999 when they froze that pension. Okay. And so, he's been retired for, probably 10 years now, and he still gets that same dollar amount. So think what inflation has done to that, especially this year, that those dollars are going further. So that's the inflation threat. Again, we began the show with inflation is a stealth tax. This year, it might not be so stealth. We see it's hitting us in the face about everywhere we go. And hopefully 2023 gets some relief to millions of Americans who really need it. And, and let's call it, this is a global phenomenon that everybody's dealing with right now, buddy.
Yeah. And I've had that question, Chris. How is it that the dollar is strengthening when we've seen inflation? Well, in the context of what we purchase with our dollars, yes, each dollar purchases less, but it's not just the dollar and the US that's experiencing this inflation. Every currency worldwide is experiencing it, and most have experienced actually a higher, even more rapid inflation than the US dollar has. And so when there's global uncertainty and volatility, the dollar seems to strengthen in comparison with other currencies. I know there is a financial rule, Chris. It talks about how long it takes for your money to double if you are earning compound interest. It's called the rule of 72. So if I am earning 7.2%, it takes my money 10 years to double. I just divide my interest rate into the number 72. If I was earning 10%, it'd only take 7.2 years, so vice versa. However, at 8% inflation, it would only take 9 years for our expenses to double. See, it works the same way with compounding interest as it does inflation. So this high inflation rate really is scary, especially for those on pensions and fixed income, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. And, it hurts everybody. I'm a boater. We paid a lot more for gas this year than we did the previous year. Go to the grocery store. And, the Federal Reserve's got a heck of a job that they're trying to do right now to get the inflation level back down. And, they do that by what they call demand destruction. They're trying to slow the economy down. That means people lose their jobs. They get laid off. And so, this certainly comes with some pain. So, be nice to your neighbor, guys. A lot of people are suffering right now across this great country. And that pain's certainly going to get a little bit worse. And hopefully they can, what they call a soft landing. So bring inflation down before the economy goes into too much of a recession. And they probably have a better chance of pulling that off here in the United States than they do in Europe, because obviously the British pound, the currency has fallen substantially. So when they're buying oil, which trades in US dollars, it takes more pounds now to buy that same amount of oil. And, for heating, because, obviously their energy, a lot comes from the Russian side of things. And we all are aware of that through watching the headlines over the last year.
Yeah. Well, this is a great resource, Chris. This report of the 3 biggest expenses in retirement, how to plan to control them. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to have a written game plan for retirement, including that component of how to cover expenses with income, a written retirement income plan. That's what Chris McIntire will help put together along with you for you. If you would like to take advantage of that offer and opportunity, if you'd like this report to go over on your own time, pick up the phone, give a call, 800-868-1194. That's 800-868-1194. 800-868-1194. As always, a pleasure joining with Chris McIntire, providing these resources on the program. Chris, thanks for being here and providing the perspective and guidance that you do.
Hey, my pleasure, everybody. Have a nice weekend out there. We appreciate you listening today. Take care and stay safe.
Visit McIntyreRetirementServices.com for many additional valuable resources, including other great episodes of Game Plan for Retirement with Chris McIntire. Be sure to subscribe.
The content of this radio show is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. You are encouraged to seek investment, tax, or legal advice from an independent professional advisor. Any investments and/or investment strategies mentioned involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. Advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, a registered investment advisor.
Fiduciary duty extends solely to investment advisory advice and does not extend to other activities such as insurance or broker-dealer services. Advisory clients are charged a quarterly fee for assets under management, while insurance products pay a commission, which may result in a conflict of interest regarding compensation.
Any comments regarding safe and secure investments and guaranteed income streams refer only to fixed insurance products. They do not refer in any way to securities or investment advisory products. Indexed or fixed annuities are not designed for short-term investments and may be subject to caps, restrictions, fees, and surrender charges as described in the annuity contract.